Hi, my name is Gibson, and I'm the co-owner and creator of the Personal Development School. This is your daily breakthrough video, and in this video, I'm going to talk to you about the 4 different types of anxious preoccupied attachment style individuals. So this is part of a series that I was doing earlier, and I tend to like pre-batch videos, so I'll sit down and record like a bunch of them, and sometimes I take breaks and all these different things in between. Anyways, I took a break and came back and recorded and then finished for the day, and then later on when I sent them off to our team to post and organize, it turns out I had left the microphone off for my last video. So there was like me talking and no sound. So this is like a long overdue video, but thanks for your patience if you've been waiting or if you're hopefully excited to see this. So before I dive into this video, we're going to talk about the 4 types of anxious preoccupied individuals specifically. But by the time you're seeing this, we are probably wrapping up our lifetime membership. We've extended it till October 10th. Literally because of popular demand and so many people asking like, can you wait for a little bit and can you extend it? So absolutely. And we always try to work very hard to, take people's needs into consideration and to know and understand what's going on with you. So if you have any other requests, please leave them in the comments below. But in the meantime, we also have our our promotion for the 2020 craziness promotion. We're with you is what it's supposed to mean. And so it is 25% off of everything. So it's literally like for the everything bundle. It's for all the 35 or so courses we have now, including our collaboration courses that we've been releasing little by little, all of the webinars we've recorded, 150, 180, I don't know, something like that now, 4 ongoing live calls with myself and our community every single week, our Discord chat channel for our community, our internal members forum, all these different really exciting things where people can bond and learn and share and grow. So coupon code in the description box below, and I'll put a link on this video too. So let's talk about the types of anxious preoccupied attachment style individuals. So the way I've sort of noticed these patterns and the way I'll characterize these is, number 1, we have our internal repressive. Number 2, we have our external expressive. Number 3, we have our socially focused anxious preoccupied individuals. And then number 4, are securely attached leaning anxious. And they have a really sort of unique component to them. So first and foremost, our internal repressive is the anxious preoccupied individual who doesn't like expressing their anxiety. And the really interesting part of this is usually the anxious preoccupied individual is aware of their anxiousness to a certain degree, and they've made negative associations to the idea of expressing their anxiety in a relationship. And so usually they feel very internally anxious, and it sort of happens in stages. They'll feel really internally anxious, then they'll start to really want to express, but they'll be like, no, I can't because I'll be abandoned. And they actually have made usually an internal belief system that says, me expressing my anxiety gets me abandoned. But then if they don't have a good place or a good outlet for it, or if they're not able to work through it, usually stage 3 of that anxiety is still sort of expanding, maybe because of a situation or a conflict or a problem in a relationship dynamic or noticing a shift in a pattern. Then this person sometimes, unfortunately, just because they don't have a better way, can rely on like sometimes manipulative tactics, and not like really like terribly manipulative, but things like trying to make their partner jealous to get validation, trying to like post things on social media to get some kind of reaction out of somebody to see if this person cares. And largely this is like the innocence in a human being feeling afraid and feeling like they're unworthy or not able to, or they'll be abandoned if they express themselves. And so it's like this desperation can sometimes take over out of that traumatized space of like total fears of abandonment that usually were programmed a long, long time ago. And then from that, those fears of abandonment get so loud. And then it's like, oh my goodness, I need some kind of coping mechanism as an activating strategy to get closer to somebody. And if I can just get some kind of response from them, it's some form of validation. Now, the other anxious preoccupied individuals can use these things, but the internal repressive usually sort of follows that set of steps. It's like they're aware of their anxiety. They think that it's not good. They think that it'll increase their chances of being abandoned. And so they rely on covert strategies to try to go in a roundabout way to create activation and closeness. And sometimes as well, you won't necessarily know that this person's anxious preoccupied in what they say and how they communicate or in their vulnerability. But you'll often see that this person's anxious preoccupied from the external perspective, sort of in their behaviors, their coping mechanisms, their like micro expressions. Like sometimes you can feel that little bit of anxiety coming from that person, even though they might feel like they're being a little bit covert. It's usually somewhat obvious or available. And sometimes this anxious preoccupied person too, the internal repressive, will take a while to, like, they'll not try to in the dating stage of a relationship, for example, move too fast. They'll be hoping for movement quickly, but they'll be holding themselves back because they associate in doing that, it increases their chances at closeness. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, we have our external expressive. So this is the typical individual who usually has really strong abandonment wounds. Usually there was a lot of inconsistency. Either it was so frequent, or the times that it did happen, it was very imprinting, like it was very strong emotionally. And so usually this person either isn't aware that they're anxious, or they can be aware, but even though they're aware, it's like their anxiety, their anxious feelings are so strong that they vastly outweigh or overpower the person's ability to feel like they have control over their behavior or ability to regulate their anxiousness. And this usually takes place primarily in romantic relationships. Some other keys you'll see here, this can take place in friendships to a certain degree though as well, or even in family relationships to a certain degree. Some key qualities of this person, you'll see that they tend to be very expressive, which can be a really beautiful thing, but sometimes they can be expressive in a way that's like overly expressive of their fears and things like that, maybe a little early in relationships, or maybe like early in the dating phase, for example. They tend to be quite anxious. They tend to constantly ruminate about their social interactions, and especially their romantic relationship interactions. So for example, they'll like think back about what they did and what they should have done and what they could have done this way and that way. And they'll tend to really ruminate and spend a lot of time there. They'll often share their fears frequently and out loud. They'll vulnerably and truly express the fears of being abandoned. And this is a really actually beautiful thing in many ways, but sometimes if it's not fine-tuned or tailored, it can push people away because people can feel like, oh my goodness, there's a lot of expectations or things like that, especially from a more dismissive attachment style. And some other qualities of this external expressive individual, sometimes they will go from relationship to relationship. They often don't like spending time out of relationships. And even if they aren't in a relationship, they're usually pursuing somebody or interested in somebody, or like trying to move in some kind of way, where they're dating somebody or getting to know somebody. So there's rarely time in the external expressive, anxious, preoccupied individual's life where they're like truly just spending some time alone. Whereas with the internal repressive, what we'll often see is that they can stay single for good chunks of time between relationships, as long as they have close friends and other social connections and interactions around, okay? And the external expressive, our second anxious preoccupied type, often they will go missing when they're in a relationship. Like often they'll be so engulfed in that relationship, and of course there's slightly stronger codependent patterns for this type. Often they will they'll sort of like disappear from their social connections because they really prioritize romantic relationships. And usually it's because some of their biggest wounding is with their primary attachment figures in childhood that they're then using their adult romantic relationships to replace. And they become so concerned with micromanaging that relationship that it takes so much of their time and energy. And then they don't have time and energy left for other relationships, but even more so, sometimes they fear that even taking time away from their primary relationship or romantic relationship would actually, not only do they usually feel separation anxiety when that happens, but they often associate that, oh my goodness, if I do that, then I'm going to potentially be abandoned by this person. And so they can be very micromanagey of their romantic relationship. Then we have number 3, which is our socially focused, anxious preoccupied. Now, this individual does usually present as anxious in relationships, and definitely usually associates or like resonates with those core wounds of like fear of abandonment, fear of being alone, fear of being disconnected, and definitely has codependent patterns that really, really pull them towards wanting to like keep growing that emotional bond in a relationship and keep getting closer. And they usually have a lot of that emotional hunger of the anxious preoccupied. However, they tend to have bigger wounds to a certain degree with their social connections. And so they can become very anxious, sometimes even more anxious to a certain degree, or at least in different periods of time. With like sort of like circumstantially, right? Like if there's more problems in a romantic relationship, they'll be more anxious there, but they have the ability to equally, if not at times more so, prioritize their friendships from an anxious perspective. And so usually they have really big wounds with friendship and exclusion. They have big wounds with feeling like they don't belong, like they're not getting approval. They usually are very focused on fitting in, and then they want approval from everybody. And these individuals will tend to replay their interactions as well, but sometimes more so socially than romantically. And these anxious, preoccupied individuals can spend decent amounts of time outside of relationships, and be very engulfed in their friendships. And as long as their friendships and social circles are moving along well and they're doing well there, they'll derive a lot of their sense of self and self-identity through that. And so sometimes at times romantic relationships can even be secondary. And this is something I see more rarely, but it is definitely its own breed of anxious preoccupied, because it's something I've seen in a pattern often enough that it's definitely worth discussing. And then our last anxious preoccupied type is our secure leaning anxious. And so this person is somebody who's usually securely rooted. And while we wouldn't necessarily say that they're completely anxious preoccupied overall, they usually have some of the core wounds of the anxious preoccupied person, which gives them those sorts of like anxious outer components or anxious edges of being anxious preoccupied specifically. So for example, you wouldn't necessarily see that their entire system of relating, their entire paradigm of subconscious programs is anxious preoccupied focused. And you wouldn't necessarily see that they have a weaker sense of self-identity and that they're deriving so much of their self-identity through their external relationships primarily. But what you would see is that they do tend to have decent boundaries, pretty good self-identity in terms of like who they are, what they want in the 7 areas of life, deriving themselves from in a more balanced perspective from all areas. But they have the core wounds of the anxious side. So for example, if there's a pattern that shifts in a relationship, like if a partner pulls away, if there's a conflict, specifically if there are challenges in the relationship, that are like circumstantially presenting themselves, then you'll see this person sort of fall in to the role of the anxious preoccupied person, experiencing the same core wounds, the same fears. And by the way, the socially focused anxious preoccupied individual, they usually really do not like being alone. They'll spend a lot of time with friends, a lot of time in their social circles, and really fear being alone, but less so fear being romantically abandoned. Whereas our secure individual, they won't really fear, a secure leaning anxious won't really fear being alone so much, and are usually somewhat balanced there, but then definitely have the core wounds of being abandoned, excluded, most specifically if it's from their partner in a relationship, like if their partner goes out with friends and doesn't invite them along or things like that, those will be big wounds. And then feelings of like not belonging, things like that. And all of these types tend to inherently value approval because they've linked approval to survival and safety. They've linked connection to survival and safety. They've linked togetherness, closeness to survival and safety. So a lot of these needs in terms of what they prioritize are literally them deriving themselves through their external relationships, their sense of self through their external relationships, because they actually at a deeper subconscious level link that to survival, to being safe. So these are our types of anxious preoccupied individuals. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below. I hope this all makes sense. Keep in mind, we have like really in-depth reprogramming courses for the anxious individual as a whole, and then also for like literally navigating the 6 stages of a relationship as an anxious individual as well. So I hope this is helpful. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.